Hi, I hope all of you are safe at home. Today this video is about causes and effects of globalization, Unit 4, Chapter 21 and 22. Let us now look at the learning objectives of this video. Through this video, we will understand the characteristics of globalization. Also, we will get to know about the factors contributing to increase globalization over the last 50 years. And also, we will understand the reasons for foreign direct investments by transnational companies and the impact that the FDIs have on recipient countries. Another learning objective is to understand the possible benefits of globalization. Also, we will look at the possible costs of globalization through this video. Let us have a quick understanding about what globalization is. The increased economic interdependence between countries is what we call as globalization. We see that the economies around the world are more linked to each other. They act as a single market. Now, for an example, the laptop or the mobile phone that we are using is not from a local brand. Definitely, it is from an international brand. So, once our needs and wants are advancing, we will go for better products, which gives rise to globalization. Now, through globalization, we are able to share technology, goods and services, new ideas, and like anyone living in any part of the country seems to be a part of the whole world. We are not isolated. We have the ability to share whatever is happening in the world through globalization. The products that are being used by majority of, we are also having the chance to use such goods. We will have a quick understanding about the characteristics of globalization in the next few slides. The first characteristic of globalization is increasing in trade as a proportion of GDP. We have noticed that in most of the countries, the total exports as a percentage of GDP or the total imports as a percentage of the GDP is increasing. This is mainly due to the advancement of the human needs and wants. We are exporting more goods. We are importing more goods and services. So, that as a percentage of the GDP will keep on increasing. One major reason is most of the developing countries are now moving towards production sector, the secondary sector, and also the service sector is also rapidly increasing. Due to these reasons, the proportion of the exports, the proportion of the imports are increasing as a percentage of the GDP. Another characteristic is the increasing importance of transnational companies and foreign direct investments. Let me quickly remind you what transnational companies are. Those are the companies who have production operations in more than 2 countries. So, sometimes to take advantage of the cheap labor, a company will locate in another country and they will have access to cheap labor. So that can also become a transnational company, right? And also through successful advertising, companies can establish a good brand name and spread their brand across the globe, right? So, and sometimes it might be the case that one production company only has the technology. Only that company has the particular technology to produce a certain good or a service. In that situation, the whole country will rely on that particular transnational company in order to get the good or the service. So, due to globalization, the importance of transnational companies are increasing rapidly, and also foreign direct investments. They are increasing level of money into developing countries in order to take advantage of the cheap labor, right? So most of the transnational companies locate in developing countries and they access the cheap labor in those countries. So due to globalization, foreign direct investments and transnational companies are growing in importance. Another characteristic of globalization is the increasing levels of migration. Migration can sometimes happen due to or other conflicting situations in the country. Sometimes people will move out of that country and locate in a better country. It might be the case that people leave the home country and leave for a foreign country in order to find a better employment opportunity, a better pay and a better living standard. So what happens? The number of people are increasingly leaving the country, and this is made transport cost is now less than before. So moving from one part of the world to another has become very easy and very cheap. So due to this, there is high level of migration of people over the world. We will now look into the factors which have helped globalization to increase over the last 50 years. One main reason for the globalization to increase is the trade liberalization. With the high level of involvement of the World Trade Organization in the trading activities of countries, the level of protectionism barriers that reduces or restricts trade. So this gives countries the chance to engage in more free trade. And also the level of trade will increase because the protectionism barriers are now lowered. So when the countries exchange more goods and services, it definitely increases the level of globalization. Another reason is the increased size and the number of trading blocs. When more countries join to the existing trading blocs, the size of the trading bloc will increase. And when more countries get together and form new trading blocs, the number of trading blocs will increase. Either way, due to the activities of trading blocs, if the trading bloc is active in their trading operations, this will lead to a high level of global trade, and ultimately the level of globalization will also increase. Another reason for the increase in the level of globalization over the past decades is the political changes. When the political system in the country changes, more countries will move towards free trade. When they get rid of the political retaliations, and when they get rid of the political problems that a country is facing, they are more likely to engage in free trade. So this establishes a good increase in the global trade and leads to more globalization. Another reason for globalization is the reduced cost of transport and communication. We have already experienced that communication, the technology is improving very massively. Every second the communication and the transport systems are improving. The technology, so it's a matter of 2-3 seconds to talk to a person in the other side of the world. Meaning like if I'm in Sri Lanka, talking to someone in Australia, talking to someone in Canada is just a matter of 2-3 seconds. We can have a video conferencing, we can have phone calls, we can emails. Likewise, communication is very quick and very cost effective. And also in terms of transport, transporting goods aren't expensive like before. Now there are cheaper ways to send goods abroad, and also processes like container given massive cost advantages to businesses. So due to these reasons, there is an increasing level of globalization and global trade between. Another reason is the increase in the significance of transnational companies. We have identified that most of the companies are now moving towards becoming transnational companies, mainly to reduce their cost. and also the existing companies are expanding operations, that also to take cost advantages. So when transnational companies are actively working in the global market, the level of globalization will also increase. Now we will look into detail about the foreign direct investments by transnational companies. Here we have some reasons as to why transnational companies engage in foreign direct investments. One major reason is to reduce the cost. They set up in countries where the labor cost is low and they get advantage of cheap labor, and also through that they establish price competitiveness. They want to make sure that they offer the best quality product at the lowest price, and also expanding their production to a new country, to another country, will increase their market share. Their profitability will also increase. So basically these are the reasons why transnational companies do more and more foreign direct investments. Let us now look at the impact of foreign direct investments on the country who is receiving it, the recipient countries. Let us now look at what greenfield foreign direct investments are. Now, when doing foreign direct investments, we have the option to either merge with an existing company or take over. But greenfield investments differ from these because in greenfield investments, we concentrate on building a new business. That is, either we are expanding our production to a new country. Suppose we are having our production operations in country X and we are establishing a new branch, a new production factory in country Y. So that is greenfield investment. And also it could be like we are establishing a new branch in another country where we concentrate on producing a new product. It could be that either we are extending the production capacity or we are starting a new business. But it is not either we are merging or we are taking over an existing business. Knowing what greenfield foreign direct investments are, now let us look at the impact of these investments on the recipient country. The first one is creating a pool of job opportunities. Obviously, we know when a new factory is set up, when a new branch is being built, there will be a lot of job opportunities. The vacant posts should be filled by the people in that country, the workforce in that country. So, usually, new setting up of a business will welcome a lot of employees to that business firm. Not only that, they will provide the training as well, how to carry out these processes, how to do certain tasks. Likewise, they will train the employees. So in that situation, what happens? The productive potential, the productivity of the workforce will also increase. Even if transnational company closes down their operation and leaves the country, still that trained workforce will remain in the country. So it will increase the long-term productive potential and also the productivity of the workforce. Another benefit is the transfer of skills and technology to the recipient country. As I have mentioned, if Japan wants to expand their production to Bangladesh, then Japan should definitely share the technology that they are using in Japan. And also the skills, how to produce a certain product, that should be shared, that should be trained to the Bangladesh workforce who are going to work in the new factory. So ultimately, when transnational companies are locating in other countries, they will carry the technology, the skill with them, and which the recipient country will benefit from. Another benefit is the local economy will gain if they can supply certain goods and services to the transnational company. When the factory is being set up, they will need access to some raw materials which they will not import. They will source it from the local recipient country. So in that case, the people living in that area can supply the respective raw materials and then gain an extra revenue. And also when building up the factory also, the company will need a lot of raw materials such as sand, bricks, cement and things like that. The people living in that area can supply these as well as their labor. It requires a lot of labor to construct a building. So in that case also they can go for an extra revenue if they are keen in supplying that service. Other positive impacts of foreign direct investments to the recipient country are it creates more competition in the market. When a new factory establishes itself in another country, it brings additional competition to the market and also improves the infrastructure in order to carry out the production smoothly. Sometimes the transnational company will invest in building up the infrastructure of that country as well, to the extent that they require, and also it brings a huge inflow of money into the financial account of the balance of payment. Basically, these are the main advantages, the impacts of foreign direct investments to the recipient countries. Let us now briefly look at the negative impacts of foreign direct investments. The main drawback is that the recipient country gets only the low-level jobs. It is not always, but sometimes when the TNC is setting up, they hire the specialist staff from the host country and the lower level workers will be hired from the recipient country. Now when it comes to a restaurant, say the chefs and the cooks are hired from the host country, they are bought from the host country, and the cleaners, the waiters are only hired from the recipient country, the lower level workers from the recipient country, whereas the most specialist and the qualified staff will be bought from the host country. Another negative impact of TNCs is that the local firms will find it difficult to compete with the transnational companies. Due to the massive size of the transnational companies, anyway they will exploit economies of scale and are able to supply goods and services at lower prices. But the local firms might not have such large-scale operations, and sometimes their prices might be higher than the products of TNCs. So in that situation, the local firms find it very difficult to compete with the TNC products in the market. If this continues for a longer period, it might result some businesses from closing down. If a business closes down, all the employees working in that organization will lose their jobs and the rate of unemployment will rise. Other than the major negative impacts we have discussed so far, there could be a chance that the transnationals might avoid paying taxes, and also there may be situations where the big transnational companies will bribe the officials and the politicians to get their work done. So the government may not get the chance of acting fairly, rather the officials will act unfairly based on the bribes that they have got. And also transnationals are said to be creating a lot of environmental pollution and damage to the environment through their activities. Also, it is argued that the profit gained from operations are sent to their parent company, which results in an outflow of money from the recipient country. So these are also some negative impacts that can result from foreign direct investments. So far in this video, we have discussed about the characteristics of globalization, and also we know the factors contributing to increase the globalization of the world, and also by now we have discussed the reasons for foreign direct investments and the impact of FDIs on the countries. As the latter part of this video, we will be discussing about the possible benefits and drawbacks of globalization to the countries. We will now look into detail about the benefits arising due to globalization. The first benefit is the increased economic growth. Globalization will increase both the actual and the potential growth of economies. For an example, in China, in 1970, the total exports of goods and services accounted for only 2.5% of the GDP. In 2006, it has increased to 37.2% of the GDP. So the total exports as a percentage of the GDP has increased between 1970 to 2006. So there is a rapid growth in the economies due to global. Also, globalization will lead to increase the productive potential of the country, the future economic growth. That is because now due to globalization there is heavy competition between the firms. So the firms are forced to be efficient. They are forced to keep their costs down and be in order to face the competition. And also we have learned that the transnational companies will train the workers of the recipient countries. So the training gained through transnational companies and the technology shared by the transnational companies will increase the future potential of countries. Also, as a characteristic of globalization, we learned that the net migration will increase. Increment of the net migration will fill the skill gaps in economies. That means if a certain country is lacking skilled workers for a particular task, migration will allow skilled workers to come and fill that gap. So this leads to higher productivity in the future. Another benefit is that the globalization increases the tax revenue to the government. We already know due to globalization the firms have found an expanded market. They have a wider market to serve now. So this increases the profitability of firms. So when firms are profitable, the revenue the government gets through corporate taxes will increase. And also when people are spending more, when they are importing more goods and services, the tariff revenue to the government will also increase. And when the income of the people in the country increases, they used to spend their consumption. That increases indirect tax revenues. But it should be noted that in developing countries, usually the tax base is around 10 to 15%. But in developed countries, it is much higher. It will account to like 30 to 35%. So developers, if they need to collect a higher tax revenue, they should broaden their tax base. And also there should be an efficient method to collect the taxes accurately and properly. Another benefit of globalization could be economies of scale. As we know, globalization finds businesses new markets. Their market that they are serving is now expanded. So they should increase the scale of operations. They should increase the scale of their production. Suppose earlier they were producing only 1 million units per month. Now they will have to produce 1.5 million or maybe 2 million units per month. So when they are increasing the scale of production, what happens? They will be able to exploit economies of scale, meaning that they will be able to produce the units at a lower cost than before due to their expanded production. This will benefit both the producers and the consumers. The producers, by reducing their cost, can enjoy higher profits, or else if they want to maintain the competitiveness, they can transfer it to the consumers in the form of lower prices. Either way, economies of scale brings benefits to the producers. Another benefit of globalization would be lower prices and higher consumer surplus. As we discussed in the above slide, businesses are able to exploit economies of scale. So they can pass on that advantage to the consumers in the form of lower prices. Also, transnational companies relocate in countries where the cost is low, particularly the labor cost. And also, globalization has given the chance for countries to source raw materials from the cheapest country. So their input cost will be less. The cost of their raw materials will be less, leading to our cost per unit. And also, due to the increment of free trade, imports are now becoming cheaper with less protectionism. So that also reduces the cost of imports. And also, ultimately when the prices for the consumers, it will result in an increase in the consumer surplus. The wider choice for consumers is considered as another benefit of globalization. Obviously, due to globalization, the consumers are now having a wide range of goods and services to choose from. For an example, say we want to buy a shampoo. When we enter the supermarket, there will be a rack full of shampoos, different brands. It might be the local ones, it will be the international ones. The consumers can specifically look at their hair problem and then select a particular shampoo. There is a wide range of shampoos from which the consumer can select. So this is what you mean by a more. We will now look at the negative impacts of globalization. One major impact of globalization is the displaced workers. We have discussed TNCs will relocate in low-cost countries. So when businesses relocate, the people working in the host country will lose their jobs. So most of the workers working in the manufacturing sector have lost their jobs, particularly in Europe and most of USA. So there is a trend that the workers who are working in the secondary sector move towards the service sector. But compared to the pay, in relation to the pay that they are getting in the sector is comparatively less to the pay that they got earlier in the secondary sector. Another argument of globalization is exploitation of workers. This happens mainly due to the unskilled workers, because when we consider the supply of unskilled workers, labor, there is a massive supply. So businesses know if one worker leaves the job, there are so many who are willing to come and work in the factory. So due to the plentiful supply of unskilled labor, businesses are having a powerful hand in handling the labor. So using the power that they have, they will try to exploit workers. But in the case of skilled workers, in developing countries, the number of skilled workers available will be very less, because due to the chance of migration, they have moved out of the country, and the number of workers who are actually remaining in developing countries will be less. So their power of the worker will be high when the number of workers available are less. So due to that, exploiting skilled labor is difficult, whereas exploiting unskilled labor is very common when it comes to globalization. Another crucial negative impact of globalization is the damage done to the environment. When TNCs are relocating in low-cost countries, they have to build up new factories. And also when the production level increases, more pollutants will be emitted to the air. And also deforestation, cutting down of trees. All these increase in trade will damage the environment, and the level of damage done to the environment will keep on increasing when the level of trade is increasing. Yet another common practice of TNCs is to engage in tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is when firms deliberately manipulate the records in order to pay an amount that is less than the actual or the fair amount of tax that they should pay. So due to tax avoidance, the tax revenue the particular country should receive will come down because they are not paying the actual amount of tax that they owe. They are deliberately changing. They are manipulating the accounting records and showing a lower profit, to which they will calculate a lower amount of tax. There are three main ways of tax avoidance. The first one is based on genuine production and transfer pricing. That is, for an example, assume product X is produced in country A and then it is sent to country B to carry out the production of country Y. So X will be for the production of product Y. So in that case, if country A's tax rate is higher, what the company will do is they will maintain artificial records of the production and sales in country A, because if they show high profits in country A, they will have to pay a portion of profit as tax. So what they do is they will show and record very low sales in country A. And then in country B, they will maintain proper records because in country B the rate of tax is lower. So they are transferring the burden of tax from countries to low tax countries. The next one is setting up an office in a low tax country. That is also like most of the countries like Ireland, Luxembourg and Bahamas, they have offices of big companies because to advantage of the low tax. And if the country is charging a lower tax, what the company will do is they will maintain records to say that most of their production happened in the low tax countries and thereby pay a lower tax to the government, and also relocate in countries where the tax is low. They will completely move their production from high taxed countries to lower taxed countries. Apart from the economic impacts of globalization that we have discussed so far, there are some non-economic impacts of globalization as well. Mainly the culture. When it comes to the culture of some countries, it has massively changed due to globalization. There will be a huge inflow of resources to a country, and if things that does not suit the country comes in, if things that does not suit the culture comes into the country, it might try to manipulate the culture that is there. And also for an example, if we take USA, the culture which was there 20 years back be the culture that is there in USA now. It has changed. And also the huge flow of foreign direct investments and the activities of transnational companies, the political system of the countries will also be affected. There is a high risk, there is a high chance that the political cycles are also affected. So globalization is not only an economic phenomena, whereas it deals with culture, political systems, technology and other non-economic factors of a country. As we are done with the content of the video, let us now look at the checkpoint questions. The first question is, how do consumers benefit from globalization? Second question, does increased trade has an impact on the environment? Third question, do transport companies exploit workers? Explain your answer. Fourth question, how do globalization lead to reduced prices? I hope this video will provide you the answers for the following questions, and I hope that everything is clear. We have come to the end of our video. Thank you for watching, and I hope everything is clear. Thank you. Be safe.